Hello and welcome to Chat DPS. Today is going to be a little bit different, and we're going to discuss an article from last week's AFR that provided quotes from David Gonski, renowned businessman and board member, from a panel discussion on AI in the boardroom. We'll walk through some of the questions posed and the answers given, starting with AI inside the boardroom. I think we're probably going to go a little bit broader and wider than just that particular subject, but the subject matter. But do we get to the stage where an AI agent could be appointed as a director of a company? Is the first sort of like thought bubble that sort of like comes up, and perhaps an AI director should be responsible for note taking in board meetings, collating information, generating board reports, and help track the underlying business. Robert, this one was an interesting one because the juxtaposition between the old and the new, where are we going, what are we doing? Because whilst I agree, Mr. Gonski is a bit of a fabled sort of like character around boardrooms. He seems to have got this rather conservative viewpoint on AI. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'd agree. And, while we don't particularly want to make this like a bashing of, David Gonski, or we'll come on to Joe Longo as well. It is interesting to just to kind of see the views of these kind of very, very, very respected business people. Who have been involved in wide variety of boards. Joe Longo, the chair of ASIC. So these are pretty big figures across the Australian business scene, and yeah, very very conservative and risk averse views, which we'll get into. And I guess it's going to be a bit different this week because I do sort of wonder when I think about it: is this a generational thing as much as anything else? So we know that Australia tends to be a little bit conservative, a little bit behind some of the other developed Western nations when it comes to maybe some business ideas, particularly the laws. We've talked about Australia being behind the EU and the US, and it's very interesting to contrast even just the views that we've been talking about in the past few weeks. So we mentioned Scott Farquhar, for example, and his speech to the press club, and how he was talking about we need to get a move on. We need to essentially pick what we're going to do. And his view was to become the data center hub for Southeast Asia, not worry so much about the models that are being built in the US in particular, and obviously China, but provide space for those models to set up. So, data centers for NVIDIA AI chips, places for these models to be, and to look at relaxing regulation. So he was very much, okay, we need to grasp this. There's an opportunity here. We need to grasp this. We need to go forward. So there you go, Scott Farquhar, slightly younger chap. Not sure which generation he represents, but it's definitely not the Gonski Longo kind of generation. So bit of a contrast there, and a bit of a contrast in views. And so if we just maybe touch on some of those quotes from Gonski on this idea of, the questions are quite interesting, and we'll talk about that. But, Gonski came back and he said, AI is wonderful, but it works for humans. I don't believe that humans should be working for AI. And then he went on to say, therefore, we're entrusted, in my opinion, with the board and the pluses and the minuses that come with that. And humans should be able to bring their humanity to being directors. And that means if you're not a human, and AI is not, and I don't believe it will ever be or should be, they're excluded. So it's quite interesting. But this is the concept of the AI director. Obviously these are questions being asked at a panel, so he's just responding to that. But I think, the first one I'd probably try and make is that it's really the wrong premise. It's not about, working for AI. I think it's more about working with AI, and how do you actually use these tools which we have at our disposal now, and use them for the benefit of the board or a business. So yeah, this concept, I think we're a long way away from an AI director, but clearly there are things that we can be doing with AI that should be considered.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. First and foremost, though, I think that one of the things that we do need to do is to clarify exactly what AI is? I mean, because it comes in different forms, right, Adam?
Absolutely, absolutely. So one of the big things is we need to define AI. So for an AI director to go through, we're talking about neural networks. We're talking about the ability for AI to make decisions based off of data that it has. But when people talk about AI, and in the context of this conversation, they're talking about generative AI or large language models. And a large language model is an interface. Think Star Trek, the computer, and you give it data, and it can tell you what it is that you need to get out of that data. And generative AI is just a pre-trained model of a bunch of info. In most cases, just whatever it can find on the internet, which, as you know, is not always rooted in fact and logic. There's so many things to go into this too. Like from an AI perspective, you look at generative AI now, it's so easy to get around ethical blocks that we've put in place just by utilize scenarios. So if you were going to use it, if we use note taking as an example for the board, and then understanding that that system can then become a target. So if AI was to be utilized from a board perspective, who's accountable if it does get hacked? And I think from a governance perspective, I'd look to you, Robert, but I would say it'd be a nightmare.
Yes, it would. But then it comes down to, okay, so if you're gonna use AI for, let's say, note taking, and I think we're all getting used to automated generated transcripts from meetings, and this will be no different. So you're using this tool, okay? So what do you know about this tool? So is it black box AI, for example? In which case, how do you monitor the safety around that particular model? Where does it connect to? Where does the information go? Is it going back to the US? Is it going somewhere else overseas? And so, you need to be considering those. So this is where you set up your AI governance framework. You put this through your risk committee, your risk management plan, and you figure out, well, what are the risks of using this particular tool, and then what controls do you put in place to mitigate those particular risks? And it might be that, okay, if you're going to use this particular transcript tool, you want to develop some sort of custom made tool where the data stays either on-prem and is controlled by that particular business, or stays within a sovereign data center, for example. So you start to put mitigations in place, and then you put controls audit. You make sure that what you think the tool is doing is what it's actually doing. So you're continually monitoring the performance of that particular tool. So you actually have that governance in place. You have those systems in place to control the use of that particular tool. So you've got to do it in a methodical way.
Yeah, I mean, using those things. I mean, I spend a lot of time on Teams meetings, and I think we've all been guilty of this. We've joined the meeting early. Your mate's joined in. You've had a bit of a yarn, and and then the meeting starts, and the transcript comes through, and it's all about what you said at the very beginning of the meeting. There's no context to the actual meeting itself. It's just like, oh, Nick said this, and David said that, and hey, this was what was discussed. But I think I mean, that's a great example where things are not exactly what they seem. I mean, businesses these days have got to start making decisions about, is it progressive to actually want to use AI, or is it just this, well, I don't really see the point in it, I mean, Mr. Gonski's perspective, there are certain other authors that I think there's a guy locally in Brisbane, Paul Smith, and he's actually written books about this whole thing. And, here's somebody that's really quite progressive and quite enamored with the thought of AI and can see business efficiency there. So, I mean, is this really what it's all about? And rather than just, well, you go with business efficiency, we want to go and do some progressive things, but the security piece is kind of holding us back just a little bit here. Is that my read of what this situation is?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point to note as well. When generative AI started to become mainstream, so if you go back to ChatGPT back in 2022, 2023, so we started to see spikes in phishing attacks that were AI driven, and a really interesting one around misinformation or disinformation, which has come out because of it as well. So I think this is why it's such muddy waters now, because there's been a good 2 to 3 years of a lot of misinformation as to what it is, what it does, where it goes through. You see that on the curve of people when they first see generative AI. and they go, "This is great. I really love it. Oh no, I'm going to lose my job. Oh, it's actually just a tool." That that process.
Yeah, and I think go back to Robert's point that was made a little bit earlier on, which I think is really quite valid. Really, I mean, I think that Australia is a conservative with a small c, sort of like country, and that is reflected in the way that our investment and capital is raised. And the amount of times that I've spoken to young up and coming directors who are sort of like so frustrated by the fact that they can't raise capital because the banks, there's no venture capital system in which to go to, so they have to go to the States because that's where you go to raise capital. If you've got this
Yeah.
great
Or the
idea.
UAE or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, the UAE. I mean, and is that in this particular context the right place to be going? I just is that fair? I mean, is that conservative with a small c kind of debate? I mean, so that it's come through the boardroom now, and that's how it's coming out because there's no venture capital to be gained.
From my experience in building a business, there is no capital to be gained within Australia. Like the market you're looking at, you're under 100,000 and under 1 million, definitely from any type of investment. And it's not geared up. Their country itself isn't geared up for that at the moment. So there's no incentives, no tax incentives. There's not a lot there to help with private equity, for example, or to build that out. It's not like how it's set up. If you look at the UAE, they have a whole bunch of incentives, public incentives for new businesses and innovation. We're not set up in that same way from a conservative perspective. And I think the Australian people have kind of spoken and said, we don't want to be the leaders in innovation. We want to be safer. We want to utilize what's proven across the board. And if that's the case, then how do we as a nation then profit off of what's going on at the moment while still keeping that conservative attitude? That's the difficult part.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you raised there, Adam, because I mean, you only have to go back 10 years, and Australia was perceived to be the innovation capital of the world. We're all innovative. We had innovative things and ways of doing things. We thought around problems, and now we've kind of, it's been a gradual cultural change to this stifling, or I'm in big business now, I need to sort of put a pressure cooker topper on this and just sort of like keep it under control, or I need to control the market, which is pretty much brought to us, I suppose, when you look back at Telstra, when the three amigos came in and basically said, we're Telstra, and put a cap on it. But I mean,
Yep.
this, Robert, goes back to your point about pick a lane, right? Because there are certain
Yeah.
things that we're really good at, and there are certain things that we're just not, right?
Yeah. So, and it's interesting. We're talking about capital and investment. So, I can't remember the name of the company, but there was an article this morning, again in the Fin Review, and a new Australian unicorn has just been created. Tasmanian based. They run data centers, and NVIDIA has just invested quite a large sum of money because apparently they have a cooling technology that can cool AI chips better than most competitors. So again, it's pick your lane. There are certain things where we are leading, and so we know that, and you guys know in particular, we're pretty good at data centers, and whether that's here in Australia or in the Southeast Asia, so NextDC, AirTrunk, and these guys down in Tasmania. So that does seem to be the place. But I think just getting back to this point about conservatism, I mean, I think, to be honest, I think it's been around forever in Australia, and I think probably where you do see the investment in the innovation is in the resource sector, because there's such an abundance of it. So it's pretty easy to invest in resources, but maybe not so much in technology. And as we said, I mean, the likes of like a Canva, those sorts of companies, they may get some initial seed funding, but when they actually want to raise serious capital, they've got to go over to the US. So I think what we're seeing in these comments from David Gonski and maybe we'll touch on Joe Longo as well, is it's just something that's been around for a long time. It's probably institutionalized across Australia in terms of this very kind of risk averse approach. I mean, the way that they speak during this panel discussion, it's as though what is happening in the US and what is happening right now in terms of what the Tech Council and Scott Farquhar are promoting, these conversations are not happening. So there's a complete disconnect between this sort of old school, very conservative view of how a board should operate and the reality of what is going on in the US, what our tech leaders are also striving for. So there's real disconnect. There's a real kind of conflict between these different kind of schools of thought.
Yeah, I mean, and we've seen in the last several weeks, the Americans moving ahead, declaration made by Trump about the fact that
Mhm.
he wants to move ahead without regulation, without any, all holds barred and what have you. And then we've got that, comparison to the quote that was from Scott Farquhar, the Atlassian guy, where he says, look, we need to move at the haste of technology rather than bureaucracy. And I think what we're seeing here is the fact that we're just not moving at all. It's glacial in terms of how we're attacking this. We just don't know. And there's no lead coming from, those central sources of government to say, hey, does this need regulation, or do we need to just let it?
And look, I mean that's we can probably just segue neatly into the Joe Longo, because obviously as the chair of
Yeah,
ASIC, he's thinking about regulation, and so some of the things he was saying was we're at risk of being a rules taker, not a rules maker.
yeah.
That's fairly typical. We're a tiny country, a tiny economy. There are lots of clever people here working on AI, but we are not the US, we're not Europe, we're not China. Our challenge is to figure out who we're going to collaborate with to maximize our strength. In a practical sense, I do think it is going to happen a lot quicker than we think, which is true. But at the same time, as Adam says, I mean, chat kind of exploded in sort of late 22, early 23. It's now late 2025, and we've seen Europe and particularly the US just really go for this, kind of go, you know what, we need to actually take some big gambles here, and AI is the way to go. And then we've got the chair of ASIC going, yeah, I think this is going to happen a lot quicker than we think, and maybe we should think about this and figure out who we need to collaborate with. It's like the train is leaving the station and it's accelerating, and you need to kind of get on quickly, otherwise you're going to get left behind.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, and just thinking about this, I mean, your example about the, Tasmanian chip company, this is serious stuff, right? Because there's no compute without the chip. So, the silicon chips kind of, and if you've got to cool the bloody thing, which you're going to have
Mm.
to at the kind of rate, the speeds that these things are working at with the kind of data that they've got going through them, the throughput is just enormous through GPUs and then all the other bits and pieces that go with them. I mean, this is a critical piece of technology. And if we're not actually there at the forefront, we've allowed an American organization to come in and basically own it by the sound of it.
Yeah, that's right.
There's an interesting thing. I don't necessarily agree with Joe when he says we're not America or China or anything else. There was an old wartime proverb that you should never underestimate a small team of
Motivated.
people. And I think we have enough skilled people. So, like, the big change in mindset from the age of AI, if we will, is ultimately when it comes to risk management or auditing of these things, it's all about threat modeling now. So what's happening out there? What's it being used for out in the wild, and how can it be used against you? And once boards understand the threats and the threat modeling around it, then we can apply more risk frameworks to that to be able to understand what we're going with. And there's no reason why Australia can't win in those side of things. We don't have to create the new language models. We don't have to create like Microsoft did with their quantum chip recently, which was baffling. We don't have to create that stuff, but we can absolutely be on the cusp of how to secure it, how to audit it, how to do assurance tasks on it. Well, those type of things, which are real world problems that will be here forever. There's no reason why we can't get ahead of the curve on those type of things. To your point, Robert, we don't have a strategy in this space. We don't, as a country,
And
we don't have a
yeah,
strategy.
we don't have a strategy, and we don't have the leadership as well, particularly at the business level. So I can understand that kind of government runs at its own pace. But when you get these experienced leaders, and maybe I'll just kind of throw in as my the last set of quotes to maybe talk about so Gonski, the last set of quotes in that article was saying that the number one thing for directors now is to understand their business. If they cannot do that, there's no need to worry about what AI can or cannot do. The next thing is understanding what AI is available and what's likely to become available, which is where Gonski will call for help. And he said, I personally feel that the risk committee is where people should be talking about it. If your risk committee is not able to deal with these sort of things, add extra people to it. They don't have to be directors to be on a risk committee, or for that matter, an audit committee. And the way that comes across, and again, it's hard to sort of get the full context, but this is the quotes that come out of the article. But it's almost like they're burying their heads in the sand, and they're saying they're just going to push those discussions down to the risk committee, the audit committee, and below, and they just need to worry about their business. And I would say, well, where's the leadership? You've got yes, there may be a massive hype bubble around AI at the moment, but this is a serious topic that needs to be discussed at the board level. And if the board doesn't have the skill sets to talk about it in the appropriate way, when they should be getting people presenting to the board, explaining what technologies are out there and how it can benefit the business. And then from there you can talk about, okay, well, if we look at some of these things, what governance do we need to put around this to actually make sure that we implement this in a safe and secure way? So it just seems to be extraordinary to me that you get these comments coming out from these senior leaders saying you should be understanding the business first and worry about AI second or third, when you should think the board should understand the business. Now, I know there's broader governance issues across Australia. You just have to look at Qantas or other organizations to see kind of governance failures, but really, this is a serious technology which needs to be discussed at a senior level, and proper decisions need to be made. It shouldn't be kind of pushed down. So I think because of the conservative nature of some of these senior leaders, we're not seeing the leadership at the board level, at the executive level, and potentially at the regulatory level. The government seems very slow to respond. The only people making noise are Scott Farquhar from Atlassian, and outside of that, it's the US companies making investments into Australia because they're just going to power ahead, and they're going to identify. So NVIDIA have clearly identified these guys in Tasmania have got a competitive advantage. They've got the skill set, they've got the knowledge. Let's invest here. So clearly, as Adam said, small teams, but clearly there's some things where we punch above our weight, and we really need to be identifying that, investing in that, showing the leadership. And that's, I think, where we're really struggling at the moment.
Yeah, that technology piece. And I think that one of the things that we do get carried away with is everything's used technology. It's all about technology. But the thing is, there are so many streams of technology that make up an overarching solution to this. We can't just say, oh, it's data center. Cooling is a very specific and very, very, sort of like clean solution all by itself. And then you've got power, and then you've got, a range of different things, as we know, the data, 7 layers of it, and, we're talking about, the fact of understanding the technology across those many, many facets. Really frightening. Adam, you got a final word?
It goes even further than that. We've brought up resources before, like a lot of the componentry of it's nickel, copper, gold, which we have a little bit of in this country. So there's no reason why we can't supply that to the rest of these type of things are this when I said strategy, I meant across our entire country. You look at all the resources that we have across all of Australia, and how can we fuel the innovation into quantum computing, into AI, into those technologies of tomorrow.
Well, that was I really enjoyed the conversation today, chaps. Thank you so much. That was Chat DPS. Look forward to catching up with you again.